Hello, beautiful people. My name is Kristen. Thank you for stopping by my channel. Thank you, especially if you're subscribed and you still are getting notifications, because it has been a really long time since I've been filming. And just the quick introduction to that is I have moved across the country, but I have continued to read throughout the year. I did read 125 books this year, so this is going to be my top 10 books, but I wanted to give a little what have I been doing for some of those of you that I have connected very deeply with over the years that I have been on BookTube, and just kind of catch up a little. But if you are not interested in that, you're in the top 10, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. I hope you will consider hanging around, becoming friends and part of my personal realm of community of BookTube. I will put a little picture up of each book I talk about, so fast forward along to the books, and you can even do that for just the books you want to hear about, because I am a very eclectic reader. I always try to focus on making sure I have some nonfiction, some actual classics, the literary fiction, fun backlist, and I love fantasy. In fact, when I looked at my story graph to see how many books I had read for the year, out of the 125, 33 had a subcategory of fantasy. So there is a little of that too. After that was literary, and after that was classic. So not a surprise. I think history was fourth. So here we go into some of the background of what's been going on. Originally when I started the channel, I was in Virginia. I moved to Texas to be near family and have a job there, and then I needed to move again. That did not situate well for my family. Not the family that was there, but the family that came with me. We really needed to try to get out of the big, busy Houstonian commuting urban life. I was born and raised there, so I can handle it, but it is not for the faint of heart to live in the wild, wild west that is Texas. We're our own animal, y'all. So my job that I was doing previously in Virginia came back open, and we decided to move the 1,400 miles back. So that is what I have done. In the meantime, the neighborhood we lived in was a smaller city right outside of Houston, and so there's no animal control, and we were trying to trap and fix cats and help animals in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, 2 of the 8 cats that I fixed while I was there, they kind of adopted us and picked our backyard as their territory, and we named them, we got attached to them, we didn't feel right leaving them, but they're basically feral cats. They're basically the only time, they've kind of been with us as ours was like fixing them and keeping them for 24 hours before they're released. So we're gonna move. We don't want to leave them. They've gotten used to depending on us for their morning chow. So we basically drug them and put them in the crates and get them in our minivan, which is pulling our 10-foot RV trailer. But the van was up there in years, and we did know it was a risk. We did know that was asking a lot of our older van, but just timing wise and getting all the way across the country, that was the gamble we took, which didn't pay off, because we got to Mississippi and the engine blew, like smoke, not debris, but noise, smoke, it was gone. It would have been more money to fix it and waiting for parts for a week, and the car was not worth that. We had already had over 240,000 miles. So we had all of our important papers on us, so we basically just titled over to the shop, which did some other things for us on our behalf and didn't charge us, kind of did an exchange for the services that we did need, that we could get, rented another U-Haul truck and put said feral cats into the U-Haul truck with us. I can put a little picture up here, and we carried on with our way. But the journey that was supposed to take just a day and a half turned into a 3-day journey, while we sorted out the car, tried to find hotels that we could house up with our cats. But they made it. We're all here. We're doing great. In fact, here's a picture. They are now pretty much domesticated. They like to spend almost as much inside time as outside time. And they've just totally they're living their best life, y'all. They're living their best life. In the meantime, our house was supposed to close and didn't close like 4 or 5 times. And we also had the fact that the movers came and got all of our stuff, all of our furniture, and we thought via the contract it was going to go to Virginia. And we were worried about us not getting there in time to, like, the furniture would get there ahead of us. No, it took almost a month, almost a full month for the furniture to get to us. They rerouted it up to Dallas, waited for bids from other moving companies till they packed in a truck that came to our area. So we were like living on the floor and air mattresses, borrowing things from everybody, trying to just because you didn't want to buy everything because it was going to come eventually. We hoped anyway. We did know that we could sue them for the value of our stuff in January if it hadn't gotten there by then. So it was this big adventure. We are on a big adventure. Even though a lot of it is very known, a lot of it was not known, or certainly not what we were anticipating. So you just have to laugh. I mean, it really is quite humorous. I think it would make a good plot in a book. Every once in a while I was thinking to myself, like looking around, did I just land in one of my novels where everything kind of goes a little sideways or a little crazy and you end up in all these situations? So anyway, without any further ado, I'm just glad to be back. I hope to do a little bit more filming, but I've got to get a new routine, and hopefully that involves that, and it will continue to involve reading, which I will continue to post about or try to share. And I did want to share my top 10. I don't have these in exact order, but I'll start with some of the nonfiction ones. I read some great nonfiction books. The first book I want to talk about is Making It So by Patrick Stewart. So if you are at all a Trekkie fan or watched The Next Generation, or you are just interested in Shakespearean acting, or Patrick Stewart, he went all the way up to even being knighted. He just has a very interesting life, and I have always been a fan. I've just always been a fan. He's probably my favorite captain. So listening to his memoir and reading his account was just super delightful. And I had bought the physical book supporting the grand reopening of a Barnes & Noble next to me, but then I discovered that the audiobook was narrated by him, so I had to end up listening to it, which most of the books that I read, over 60% ended up being audiobook this year, which I'm not a huge fan of audiobook, but I had a 2-hour-a-day commute. So a lot of these were also the audiobooks. So Making It So by Patrick Stewart. Also read a book by Daniel James Brown, who is the author of Boys in the Boat, and that was called Facing the Mountain. And it is the story of Japanese Americans during World War II. So of course, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, set us off for war on the other side of the continent, and having already gone to war, of course, in Europe. And so kind of doubled our trouble, right? And there were a huge number of Japanese Americans living in America. So it's a fascinating account of going through with looking at very specific stories, groups of people, and specific people by name that experienced that and what they went through and how we managed them or mismanaged them. And I learned a lot about that war in the Pacific that I had not really known. Even though I had read several books about the war in the Pacific, it still had a lot of new facts for me. And if you like Boys in the Boat, which is one of my all-time favorite top 10 nonfiction, you will also appreciate this one because he even talks about the similarities or points out and saying, hey, remember this character in Boys in the Boat? This is how this is connected now to this story. So just fun little moments and kind of almost Easter eggs throughout the book. The last book that was maybe my very favorite nonfiction out of the year was An African's History of Africa by Zeinab Badani. This started in Egypt and kind of circled the entire continent and gave brief highlights what historically is known for each of the countries, how they are connected, how the rest of the world influences or colonialized, or what did that actually mean? What was actually that culture versus having a Western culture come into some of these parts? Anything that I had previously maybe had made the news about the AIDS crisis, about the Nigerian girls of Chibok, about the Rwanda genocides, all these things that I had heard little bits and pieces or news or had kind of come into our periphery. It goes into the next layer and it connects it, and it really starts to make a beautiful picture of that history. And so I think in part the author's note was mentioning that she really wanted a lot of new pride or ownership for those that it is their heritage, but for those of us that it's not directly our heritage, that we also get to go along on the journey and learn about that culture, about those facts, about that history. And I, for one, was there for it. I really, really appreciated that book. A couple books that were fiction that maybe not for everybody, but definitely made my top 10 was I read The Wedding People by Alison Espach. Now, this is a very popular book this year. A lot of people have recommended it. I used it as my vacation read. So totally recommend it as a vacation read. It is basically a woman who's kind of at the end of her rope. She does not know that she even wants to be here. She's kind of, checking out, and she kind of goes off for this final hurrah to someplace really ritzy resort kind of thing. Like, I can't even afford to necessarily do this, but I'm going to go do it. And it ends up supposedly supposed to be rented out for a big, expensive, elaborate wedding. But she squeaks in there, not really supposed to be part of this, but then becomes part of it. And it's hilarious, but it still is one of those kind of things where you're trying to figure out life and trying to make good decisions. And again, even though it has some heavier topics about, if it's okay to live or die, when is the quality of life done? It's has so much just humor and talking about like the beginning of marriage, the beginnings and ends of things, I would say. So totally, I actually recommend that when you're in the mood for that kind of book. Also, maybe not for everybody, but really hit home for me, my favorite now, Sally Hepworth, The Soulmate. I really loved this book. I wasn't sure when I started reading it, and here's my disclaimer that you may not be into this as well. It has multiple narrators, different perspectives throughout the story, and the premise is kind of looking at the question of what makes a soulmate, what makes a good relationship. And so we're looking and we're following different people telling their stories who are in these relationships, and you're trying to figure out, like, not necessarily if it's an unreliable narrator, but how we perceive it. How are we judging our relationships? And one of the voices, it starts out with the story of a family that owns a house on a cliff that a lot of people take their life. They go up there to jump. And so the husband who's in this place is pretty good about talking people off the ledge, literally. And so if they ever see anybody that seems like they're loitering around the edge, then, he will go out. And so one day he goes out and he doesn't succeed. And then the wife isn't sure that he wasn't somehow connected or involved in this. And so there's a mystery, and we're going through and doing that. Now, the woman who doesn't make it, the woman who jumps, we hear her perspective. So if you're really down with a ghost kind of perspective, which I wasn't sure I was going to totally hang with that. And at first I was like, I don't know, Sally Hepworth, you're kind of getting a little out there for me. but I ended up really loving it. I really ended up really appreciating this kind of beyond the grave final say, and she's kind of outside looking in at the characters and the action, and I really ended up appreciating that. And I appreciated, I like a lot of philosophical judging the meanings of life kind of thing, which you will also appreciate, because I'm going to say my favorite classic of the year now, because it kind of ties into this, and that is actually The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So this book is basically, there's a father, Fyodor Karamazov, and he has 3 sons biologically, and then there's like an illegit son as well. And so you're following along, and like one has like the religious priestly aspect, and one has a really intellectual highbrow, and one's kind of the modern day freelance, passionate, dramatic son. They're searching, but they're all kind of suspect in the father's passing. And so you have also kind of a mystery, what's going on. It goes through like even the court scenes, they end up accusing one of them. They're going through trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure it out, but it's not as much even as figuring out the death as it is, again, figuring out life and the meaning of life, and how do we make the choices of who we become, and how is that even tied into our family. So brilliant, loved it. Totally a 5-star classic for me. Going back to some fiction, other ones that were super engaging for me that I thought were very well written and just very engaging. Wayward by Amelia Hart. It is like a 3 timeline. One's 1600s, 1900s, and 2000s. And they're looking at like being accused of witchcraft and some World War II and some modern day domestic issues. And then they each have, though, a secret kind of gifting, kind of genetically tied through the generations of being overly connected to nature. It felt almost a little bit like that Snow White calling of the animals, but it's not overt or cheesy or overdone. It's more along the lines of, again, that kind of mystical, inherent, how some of us are just more empathetic or just tied into certain animals will approach you kind of thing. It was a really fascinating story of, again, family ties, and also just these women trying to find their voice, trying to look at the role of women throughout time as well. The last 3, these are definitely my top 3. I'm not sure exactly what order they would be in, but let me tell you about the fantasy first, because I, again, read a lot of fantasy, and one of them I only meant to read the first in the trilogy, and I just couldn't stop. I read the entire 3 trilogy. I don't know how many pages it is total. Maybe I'll try to look it up and put a thing. It was a lot of investment, and I wasn't sure when I first started reading this particular one that I was going to like it, because a lot of it was in that second person where you don't know what was going to happen when you walked into the room. Like I don't usually find that style, that second person usually puts me off. So I wasn't sure, but a couple of the characters and storylines were told in third person, and the overall world building is that this world has seasons. Fantasy of the 5th season. When the 5th season hits, there is basically the end times. It cycles through, and when it starts over, since everything's been wiped clean off the slate, it's really hard, or the histories may or may not keep up. And so you have the supernatural elements and prisms and craters and things that you don't know what exactly they are, and relics, and you're trying to figure out the different people groups, the different species or magical abilities, and some groups exploit other groups and use other groups, and why are they doing that, or how are they doing that, or it's really engaging to try to sort out how it's all going to go down. And you're following a couple of the main characters who are brought into this very young, and they are raised to do certain tasks or on certain quests. And so they're also questioning what's going on and kind of weaving that all together throughout the trilogy. And it is brilliant. I absolutely 5-star love this trilogy. It's called The Broken Earth is the entire trilogy. Totally recommend you check into it more if you are a fantasy type, because that was the best one. In the top just couple, I'm not sure which one to mention first, but so I'll just pick and start with Fredrik Backman's My Friends. I love Beartown. Beartown is one of my very favorite books, but I think this is now my favorite Fredrik Backman book. I love it. It is told through the premise of a girl who is very artistic and loves the arts, who's also broken homes, travels around in foster homes, and she comes across this artist who has done this painting of friends on a dock in the summertime. And it is kind of an actual historical, like these are real people. And so she's learning about the story of who these people are and what is each of their story and how are they related and how they were kind of chosen family in a way. And she's trying to obviously find her place in the world and her family and trying to make sense of it all. So again, another one of these stories that's kind of talking about the importance of life and the things that matter, but it has the art component. You're learning about the painting itself. There's all kinds of mystery and drama, and again, death, and trying to make amends to all the different connections of all these different stories. And I don't want to say too much about any one of those in particular, because if any of that sounds good, just start reading it. See if it's your style. I love his style. I love how he does have those little side quips, just these little observations kind of to you, the reader. And I just always end up feeling like I've learned something and spent some time with tea with a good friend. That's how I usually feel when I end up reading his books. And finally, the last book I will talk about that was in my top 10 for sure. Loved it. I think it's actually the year before that it came out, but that would be James by Percival Everett. This is the retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim the slave, the runaway slave. But here in this book, he is James. He is self-educated, knows how to read and write, and even studied the philosophers. And so he's retelling the story from the perspective of someone who really deeply understands the culture and the misabuse of slavery, the challenges that Huck would have also gone through as a lower cared for white boy in that time, going on the Mississippi, having all these adventures. It was gripping, even though on some level you kind of sort of know what's going to happen if you know the general story of Huck Finn. It was still very suspenseful and impactful, and I loved, my favorite part was the asides that James would share with us about what he was seeing and what his perspective was as things went along, even comparing those to the different philosophers or different events of other things that he knew about. So there you have it. There's my top 10 of 2025. Have you read any of these? Do you agree with any of them? Do you disagree with any of them? Did I leave one out that is your favorite that I should add, that maybe it is similar to one of the ones that I love and now I should read it? Let me know. I'd love to meet you in the comments. Hope that everybody is doing well. I really did miss YouTube and my friends and would like to catch back up and hope to do so. If not, just know that I have all the warm, fuzzy feelings in the world for you and wish you the best and happiest 2026. Take care.